G'day, I'm Baz, a 34-year-old dude from Melbourne, Australia. I make videos for money and also for fun and try to be helpful, like in this video. About 2 years ago, I got a little inkling, got a few small clues, and then I got a slightly bigger inkling and some really hard to deny, even though I tried my best to in fact deny them, clues that I might have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And because that name is really long and it's hard to stay focused, we just say ADHD. I wanted to talk about my experience, not because I think that my story is particularly interesting. It's not. Or because my situation, unlike my brain, is atypical. It's not. I'm a pretty normal dude. I just wanted to make something that was helpful, that if I had stumbled across it 2 years ago when I was starting to put the ADHD puzzle together, that it might have been really helpful. So this video is for me 2 years in the past, but it might also be for you right here and right now. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what it's like to get diagnosed with ADHD as an adult in Australia, what I've learned, and I guess what I found helpful. Groundskeeping. Please feel free to jump around if you like. Classic ADHD move there, by the way. I've broken up the chat into chapters, so if you're looking for something specific, it might be easier to find it that way. The basics. This is not a ADHD 101 video. There's a whole host of people who are way smarter than me and actually qualified to explain the what, why, and how of ADHD, but I do want to bang out a couple of ADHD basics. So the smart people who study this stuff reckon that ADHD affects about 3% of the Aussie population, and I've seen like 5 or 6% thrown around in a few places too, but that's just a bit of an idea about its presence or prevalence in the population. There seems to be a bit of a genetic component to it. Gabor Mate, in his book Scattered Minds, says that he thinks it's more of a predisposition rather than a predetermination. So your environment, how you were raised, what kind of situations and relationships you find yourself in has a lot to do with how your ADHD does or doesn't rear its hectic head. You can present as having inattentive presentation or present predominantly hyperactive impulsive, or if you're really an overachiever, you can present with both inattentive and hyperactive impulsive. There are a few things that go into an ADHD diagnosis. In Australia, at least, it's not just a quiz and here's your stimulant medication. It's actually a pretty slow, expensive, and clunky process at this point anyway. I won't get into the specifics of what goes into a diagnosis, but there's a whole collection of criteria and symptoms that you've got to have. If you want to check out that very fun list, it's called the DSM-5. Very sexy, very catchy. It stands for Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition. And can I just say, the 5th really slaps, edition 1 to 4. A little bit sophomoric, a little bit underbaked if you ask me. Anyway, those criteria that you can check off, they need to be impacting your daily functioning and development and have been doing so for at least 6 months. The degree to how much it's affecting your life is important, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. When you're getting tested for ADHD, they're going to run through your history. They're going to talk to people who knew you when you were developing, so that's parents or guardians or teachers, maybe coaches, people like that. They're also going to check that other things aren't swimming around in that brain of yours, like anxiety or autism, depression, bipolar, other funky stuff that might explain symptoms that you're experiencing. And now I would like to run through a few common misconceptions. A massive misconception that persists, especially here in Australia, is that you could only have ADHD if you were that hypo kid at school and you couldn't sit still in class and you were like, oh, shiny thing, and gone. And like, yes, some people with ADHD can very much be that, but it can also present a shit ton of other ways. One of the biggest surprises for me was discovering that I'm fairly impulsive and I'm fairly hyperactive. The impulsivity thing, I was like, yeah, I can see it. I fucking hate waiting in line for anything. I'm often dying to jump in on a conversation while the other person is still speaking. And I don't even really want to get into impulse buying, all sorts of dumb shit. But I was like, no way am I hyperactive, because I edit videos all day in a dark room. I'm a patient guy. I don't fidget. And it turns out that my hyperactivity comes out verbally. I talk really fast. My words can't keep up with the speed of my thoughts unless I'm reading off a teleprompter. I love a tangent. As I just said, I'm often waiting for people to finish talking so that I can say the super important shit that's bursting to come out of me. And another thing that falls under the hyperactivity banner that hit me like a ton of bricks is that feeling of needing to cough, is that feeling of I should be doing something. I thought everybody had that feeling all of the time. And it turns out that they don't. Lots of people don't need 3 beers to turn off that annoying shithead in their brain that's like, hey, you should be doing something. Why aren't you doing something? ADHD is just a lack of discipline or laziness. I feel like for all these misconceptions, I want to do like the ADHD is just a lack of discipline or laziness. No, it's not. And that's pretty harsh. People with ADHD often struggle with executive functions like attention and working memory, prioritizing long-term goals and time management, just to name a couple of things that I personally suck at. It can be a real shit brain salad when you slap together sucking at a few of those executive functions, plus add in dud motivation. That can make starting and completing tasks a bit of a nightmare. ADHD is a cop-out. ADHD is just a license for selfish or hurtful behavior. No. My mate is a teacher and he often says to parents who are kind of scapegoating their children's bad behavior on something, say ADHD, he says it might explain the behavior, but it doesn't excuse it. What he's really saying there is that we are still responsible for our actions. And for me personally, I never want to use ADHD as an excuse. You will not hear from me, sorry I'm late, I have ADHD, or sorry I missed the deadline, my ADHD is flaring up. You are human, you are gonna fuck up. And if you do have ADHD, you're probably gonna fuck up a lot in some very predictable ways again and again. But that is still not an excuse. I think the best way to go about it is to apologize quickly, work on strategies, put in guardrails, try to develop good habits, try and put yourself in good environments, set 1,000 alarms, set them comically early, set them so early that you feel like a dum-dum. You will feel like a dum-dum, but you'll also be an on-time dum-dum. And that's a nice feeling than being a running late dum-dum. What I'm trying to say is ADHD doesn't have to be an excuse for anything if you don't want it to be. And it certainly shouldn't be used to excuse a lack of accountability or responsibility, and definitely not as an excuse for antisocial behavior. ADHD is the disease. No, ADHD is not a disease. The disorder part of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is a bit of a misnomer because it's a bit misleading. In medical terms, disorder is an ailment or disease, and ADHD is not a disease. As Gabor Mate says, it's more of an impairment rather than an illness. ADHD is overdiagnosed. This is also not true. ADHD is more commonly misdiagnosed, as in someone who has ADHD gets incorrectly diagnosed as having something else, a totally different condition. Or sadly, the other thing that happens quite a lot is it just gets missed completely. It flies under the radar because the symptoms aren't impacting daily functioning and development enough, aka the symptoms aren't fucking up your life obviously enough. So if anything, ADHD is still underdiagnosed given its prevalence in the population. The percentages we said at the start, 3%, 5 to 6%. The overall number of diagnoses of ADHD have increased over time and the public awareness has gone up. And take it from my own personal experience, it can certainly feel like ADHD is everywhere. Everyone's talking about it, especially when you click on a few ADHD reels and all of a sudden they start following you everywhere you go on social media. My journey. Yeah, cool. This is the part where I talk about me. I've been seeing a psychologist regularly for about 1.5 years, working through some personal stuff, some work headaches, trying to establish better boundaries in my relationships, trying to not be such a people-pleasing fuck. Adulting 101 kind of things. At the same time, my housemate had been sending me a slew of ADHD memes that were striking a very emo power chord, more frequently hitting than missing. So one day when I'm in therapy, aka paying a third-party professional to listen to me complain, my therapist just said kind of casually, hey, have you ever thought that maybe you have ADHD? And I'm like, funny you should say that. My housemate has been sending me all these ADHD memes, and I'm like, wow, that's me. It didn't really go any further than that. It just kind of planted a seed because we were already working through some strategies around keeping on top of work stuff and trying to have more honest and hard conversations with people in my life. I kind of felt like I had more than enough stuff to work on. And so just kind of put the ADHD maybe question mark thing to the side. And I was kind of also like, hey, I'm like 30 something now. I'm fine. I'm good. Like if I got it, then I got it, whatevs. So flash forward about a year and I'm having this tricky, shitty spell with work. And it was very unproductive, uninspired. I was unwilling to pull my finger out to get shit done. And for context, I run my own business. So it's very important that I do the my own part of the my own business. So I realize it now. I probably didn't realize it then. I was in a funk. And all the usual tools that I would pull out of my toolbox were doing sweet fuck all. And within that kind of bigger season of funk, which was probably a couple of months of not really feeling it, I had a real scary couple of weeks where I started to fuck with my money. And they're my words for my feelings, so that might not make sense to you, but it kind of translated just to not being great with long-term clients of mine. And it was this kind of weird feeling of like self-sabotage. And it felt like I was watching it take place. I kind of recognize it now as dissociation. And to use a very wonky juggling analogy for that scary period, and again, this may be very specific to me because I juggled as a kid. It was one of the 2,750 hobbies that I've undertaken in my lifetime. ADHD, what up? That scary period felt like dropping ball after ball after ball when you're meant to be good at juggling and you're watching yourself drop the balls and you realize, hey, I'm not actually trying to even catch them. And then you realize, hey, I don't actually give a fuck. And then you think like, come on, like I probably should pick up those balls. But then you think, not only do I not want to pick them up, I don't even want to juggle. And then someone says to you, why aren't you juggling? You're like really good at juggling. I thought you loved juggling. And you're like, yeah, I'll pick them up. I'll juggle again soon. But really, you're like, shut the fuck up about juggling. I'm never going to fucking juggle again. So yeah, shit was pretty dark. When I got out of that season of suck, I realized that it was probably worth finding out a little bit more about this ADHD thing. And looking back now as future Basil, I can see that there was a lot going on around lack of motivation, and there was zero INCUP, which is my favorite acronym now. It stands for interest, novelty, challenge, urgency, passion. And there was zero, sweet fuck all in the stuff that I was trying to do at that time. Zooming back to past Basil, I talked to my psychologist and she recommended going to a neuropsychologist who specialized with people that have ADHD. It turned out this was a little bit of a wasted step, and I mean that purely in terms of money and time. I personally got some value out of 2 talk sessions and 2 cognitive testing sessions because I love that brain stuff, but I don't believe that I got $2,000 worth of value out of them. And considering that you don't need to do that step, I think that most people can skip it. What I didn't realize is that in Australia, psychologists and neuropsychologists can assess and diagnose ADHD, but they cannot prescribe medication. So if you want to try the brain pills, you got to go to a psychiatrist, and they do their own comprehensive assessment and determine an appropriate treatment plan for you, and that may or may not include medication. So that was the many steps in the 2-year journey between spicy ADHD memes resonating with me and ultimately getting an ADHD diagnosis. Before you run away, I want to offer you some tips or frames, as I like to say, of thinking about ADHD that I found and continue to find really helpful. Your brain isn't going to change. I found this to be the most freeing and liberating and that's nice kind of thought. Your brain is not going to change with a diagnosis. Let's say that you do get an ADHD diagnosis. Your brain doesn't all of a sudden get infected with an ADHD virus. You're not really getting anything when you get a diagnosis. What you're really getting is a label or a framework. Your brain is still your brain. You're still going to like what you like. You're still going to dislike what you don't. You're still going to be good at the things you're good at, and you're still going to struggle with the things that you've always struggled with. And I found that thought extremely helpful, especially when I was walking into the clinic to get the results of my ADHD testing. I was like, yeah, whatever happens today, it's going to be sweet. The brain that's walking into the clinic is the same brain that's going to be walking out. ADHD is about degree of disruption, aka how much it fucks up your life. Many people wonder, how the hell can ordinary or everyday traits make up the components of a disorder, exactly like they do with ADHD? That skepticism is totally understandable. Many people have terrible memories. Many people procrastinate. Many people struggle to stay on task. But ADHD is a diagnosis of dimension, focusing on the degree of disruption rather than merely exhibiting a trait. Or, to say that in a Mark Manson way, it's not about possessing the trait. It's about how much it fucks up your life and how consistently it does the fucking. ADHD, like most things, is a spectrum. ADHD looks, sounds, and presents differently in different people. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. Some people with ADHD have very strong attention to detail. They're organized. They have a great memory and they have great self-control. Other people struggle with these exact areas, myself included. When you're learning about ADHD, you'll hear all these different examples of things that people with ADHD do. That's such an ADHD thing to do. Some of these things will hit so hard, you'll question whether the person writing them has been reading your journal or is a certified mind reader. I remember a person with ADHD on a podcast saying they felt like the laziest productive person they knew. And I was like, holy fuck, I've described myself like that. I feel that exact contradiction all the time. Other things will miss the mark, and they'll miss so badly you'll get this little spike of smugness and you'll feel like a neurotypical normie for a hot second, and then you'll remember that you've forgotten to hang up your washing for 3 cycles in a row, and that smugness will get taken down just a notch, maybe 2. Everyone is going to have an opinion. People are going to should all over you. When you bring up that you have ADHD or you think you might have ADHD, they'll offer you plenty of unsolicited advice. You're going to cop it from all angles. And that's a really tricky thing when you're trying to navigate and figure it out for yourself. You don't have all the answers, and the people you're talking to certainly don't have all of the answers either. Can you listen to people tell you stuff on YouTube? Of course you can. Hello. But I would also recommend talking to professionals and getting as much high quality information as you can get your mitts on. I personally would trust the qualified assessment of a psychiatrist who, remember, studied medicine for 5 years and then interned for a couple more years and then underwent supervised clinical practice for a few more years after that, rather than the opinion of your flat-earthing Arnie Beryl. No offense, Arnie Beryl. For the record, your pavlova is still second to none. And you were right that one time about Daryl up the road. He was stealing your chrysanthemums at night. It takes time, money, and paperwork. To get an accurate ADHD diagnosis in Australia, you must undergo a comprehensive assessment by qualified professionals. And it's quite a lengthy and unfortunately expensive process. They're not handing out diagnoses like Vegemite sandwiches at an Aussie picnic. Cheers to ChatGPT for that wonderful simile. In terms of the length of the process, the time it took between my psychologist mentioning, have you ever thought that maybe you have ADHD, and getting the diagnosis and ultimately starting to take stimulants, the journey was about 1.5 years. And I'm not counting all that time that I spent ignoring the signals and twiddling my thumbs. I'm talking about action time. So getting into a psychiatrist was tricky. It involved lots of ringing around to see who would take new patients, and eventually I got my first available appointment, and that was 10 months from the day that I called, so definitely not an overnight thing. It's also not cheap to go to the psychiatrist. It's partially covered by Australian Universal Healthcare, aka Medicare, but it's still hundreds of dollars out of pocket. It's not cheap. At each stage, there's plenty of paperwork and appointments. And if you do have ADHD, those things are most likely not your favorite things, but have patience. Ultimately, I think it's a worthwhile path to pursue if you feel like all roads are kind of leading you towards an ADHD diagnosis. And especially if it starts to feel like someone's cranked up life to hard mode, it's probably time to talk to a professional. When I was putting this video together, I realized that, hey, in the last couple of years, I have learned a thing or two about ADHD. And in doing so, I've learned a shit ton about myself and what makes me tick and what makes me ticked off, what I'm awesome at. And obviously, it's really hit home the things that I struggle with. So for me, getting an ADHD diagnosis wasn't scary, or it wasn't even a surprise in the end, because I had read so much about it and looked at my own life. And at the end of the day, it was mostly a relief. And that was the most surprising part. I kind of feel like I had carried around this weight for years and I didn't exactly know what it was. I couldn't figure it out. I knew that when it came to motivation and execution, not all the light switches matched up with all the bulbs. Like, I knew there was some faulty wiring going on somewhere, but I wasn't quite sure. And the other thing is, it's really nice to know that other people struggle with the exact same shit that you do. And it's also really nice to know that they have not just coped with it, but they've done so successfully. They've been able to navigate those similar rough seas, and you can steal their strategies and safeguards and implement them into your own life. You can be happier and healthier. And I really do hope that for you, whether you have ADHD or not, I hope you are able to get some strategies that make your life better. I feel like I should say, you got this, but I don't know why. Good luck. Thank you so much for watching. See you later.